If you're getting ready to do your holiday shopping at places like Adidas, Best Buy, or Ulta, make sure you don't miss out on a ton of savings and head to Rakuten first. Rakuten helps you save big on whatever you're buying year-round, but especially for the holidays. It allows you to gift yourself some cash back while you're out getting gifts for friends and family. Save on festive home decor, party outfits, and that annual holiday trip. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on top of the biggest sales of the season, so you get the most savings. And it's easy to use. Just start your shopping at Rakuten.com or use the Rakuten app. You'll get your cashback payments through PayPal or check. Rakuten works by partnering with over 3,700 stores, with those stores paying Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and then Rakuten shares the money with you as cashback. Join for free at Rakuten.com or get the Rakuten app. That's Rakuten. Gift yourself some cash back this holiday season.
I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm excited to announce Season 4 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've got a whole new bunch of stories to share with you about the most fascinating people and things who are no longer with us. From famous figures who died on the very same day, to the things I wish would die, like buffets. All that and much more. Listen to Mobituaries with Mo Rocca wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Perry Carpenter, one of the hosts of the Digital Folklore podcast, and this is Digital Folklore Unplugged. Unplugged episodes are where we ditch all of the fancy production and the story elements to bring you the raw or only slightly edited interviews with our folklore experts. On today's episode, my co-host Mason and I got to speak with Ben Radford.
Hi, I'm Ben Radford, author of a dozen or so books. I'm a folklorist, a researcher, investigator, and doer of weird things.
In this interview, Ben gives us the lowdown on creepy clowns, media literacy, the influence of folklore, and the psychological aspects of human belief. We touch on how misinformation and panic are spread through viral hoaxes on social media, and we use that example of clown sighting panics as a case study. Ben also discusses his investigations into paranormal phenomena and the experiences and empathy needed for effective investigation. His approach to investigative skepticism emphasizes the necessity for respect and rigorous research. Oh, and our Patreon subscribers not only get early access to this, but also get to hear a super funny story about a clown named Crotchy that was just a little bit too spicy to share in this public feed. So if you want to hear about Crotchy the Clown, head over to Patreon and sign up now. Okay, let's get unplugged.
Getting people to talk about like the weird thing they're excited about is always wicked fun and lends itself to like really great stuff. So I would like to prioritize hitting on whatever weird thing that you are like, this is so cool.
I collect clothespins, but you probably don't want to hear about that. So
I actually do, because are they all just normal clothespins, or are they like is there like
no, they're not. That's what makes them interesting. I don't want to derail this, but no, I've got several hundred different types. The most interesting one was one from the Great Depression, where it's actually made of a soup can that you can tell there's still the writing on it, and so they used to go door to door selling these clothespins or clothes pegs. But no, I've got, it's interesting. That's actually what I find most interesting about clothespins, is that it's universal, right? Everybody around the world uses clothespins for the most part. Maybe not, in the farthest north, because of course you put your laundry out and it freezes in the Arctic,
right?
But everywhere else they have these clothespins, and for such a simple premise, for such a simple device, you would think that, there's one design, right? Everybody, you there's a line, these things hold it there. But instead, you find a wide variety. There's ones that are wood, plastic, metal, different designs, different springs, different clasps. So that's what I find interesting, is that on the surface, it's a clothespin or a clothes peg, depending where you are. But when you get into it, you realize that this actually holds this variety. And it's weird because like there are certain people, like they're interested in like cars, right? So if they're watching a historical movie, they're like, oh, check out that 1938, blah, blah. For me, it's clothespins, right? So if there's a TV or a film and there's a scene where someone's putting out a clothesline, I'm looking at the clothespins. Like, what kind is that? Do I have one of those?
Well, that's great because it's like the little stories embedded in these ignored everyday objects, right? That sort of tell where they were from, the time that they were in, and everything.
Exactly. But anyway.
Are you then like a snob wherever you are watching a movie and you see somebody put out clothes on a clothesline from the 1800s and they're using a 1900s era clothespin?
No, I don't get that snobby about it. Partly because there's actually not that much literature on it. So, one of the things that I've done in my career, in my writing, is to pick topics that are sort of really niche, right? And so I'm not interested in the Civil War. I'm not interested in NASCAR. I'm not interested in the Russian Revolution. And there's a million books on that. If you want to read it, go find it, right?
Right.
So my interest is in finding aspects of culture and pop culture and just the world around us that hasn't been done to death. In fact, is often taken for granted and no one thinks about it, right? Evil clowns and chupacabras and things like that. And so that's really what interests me. And so, but one downside to that is that often there's not much on it. So if you look for books on clothespins, last I checked, there were none. And I mean, I'm sure there's somebody somewhere, but I mean, it's such an ordinary object that people don't think, why is this worth writing about? And to me, that's exactly why it's worth writing about. So if I had the time, which I don't, I would devote 6 or 9 months to writing the definitive history of clothespins. But meanwhile, I'm busy with evil clowns.
Right.
That is fascinating in the weirdest way possible, but that's really cool. I know a guy who has similar kind of tangents, but it's all around magic and mentalism. So he'll go write a book just on the history and all the permutations of key magic, or like haunted key magic, where it's using ideomotor movement in your hand to turn things. And he'll dish like 200 pages and then get all these other guest contributors and everything else to add routines and stuff to it. And it comes out as this really interesting thing on a very extremely niche subject.
Yeah, in fact, I subscribe to Genie, the Magician's magazine, even though I'm not a magician, don't claim to be. I mean, I love the art form. I catch magicians every time I can. Anytime in Vegas, I want to go see them. I can't do it. I have friends who are, but it is interesting sort of reading that as a non-magician.
Mm-hmm.
I can sort of glean, some stuff out of it. But yeah, I mean, just, there are references to 800-page books on, some move, right? Some card move, or like, wow, like I think I'm a nerd. This is a whole other category. So I got nothing but respect for that.
Yeah, I hear that throughout society, there's two huge areas that fill library after library, and it's always like subversive content. It's always like pornography and magic.
Fair enough.
That makes sense. Poking my nose into hyper niche content is my favorite thing too. So like, I can very much relate to that. Also, my retirement plan now is to open the Museum of Porn and Magic. Thank you, Terry.
Hey, you know what? If you need a board of directors, I'm there.
All right.
Let me know.
Pull a rabbit out of.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Fill in the blank. Okay. Let's divert from that. One of the things that I love about you and then love about your work is the skeptics angle that you take. I'm interested in like, how do you get into that as a career? And then I do want to talk a little bit about the unique way that you do it, because I think that you have a much more approachable tone than some of the other members of the skeptic community, and how you become very approachable to people with different belief systems and some of the things that you're trying to investigate. So first of all, how do you end up giving a career to investigating all this fun stuff that you get to investigate?
Yeah, it's an odd story. How did you end up here? Usually when you hear the words, how did you end up here? It's within the context of like, jail or, the streets, or it's not the White House, except in some people's cases. In my case, like most people, I was always interested in weird things, right? I was a kid, I was growing up, and, I remember being 8, 10, 12 years old, and I'm seeing these TV shows, and this is before podcast, kids, so this is how old I am. These TV shows and radio shows and movies and things on, mysterious topics, right? There was In Search Of and all these sorts of things. And I was fascinated, right? I'm like, oh, this is so cool. There's aliens, landing in crops and making circles, and they're abducting people, and there's Bigfoot out there, and the Loch Ness monster. And I grew up in this tiny small desert town in New Mexico, which I actually don't live too far from there now. And to me, growing up as a kid, these mysteries seemed very far afield. Like it's in Scotland. Like, where's Scotland? I don't know. It's like cold. I don't know. It's up there by England, right? I didn't know. And it seemed like all these mysteries that I was hearing all these dramatic, sensational stories about were in these far off places. And I was like, oh, I want to go investigate, right? I want to go I want to go find Bigfoot. I want to go be captured by aliens, maybe do butt stuff. I don't know, whatever. I'm open. So I'm trying to, I'm wanting to sort of get into researching these things. And so I'm buying, so I remember I would buy a lot of used books. And so I would get my allowance and I would go to a used bookstore not far from the elementary school that I went to. And I would come home with just stacks of books under my arms. And these are books on UFOs and runes and mysteries and psychics and all these sorts of stuff. And I'm just reading these and I'm fascinated by them. And, it's very authoritative, right? Because it's a book and like the person's name is on the cover. Like they wouldn't publish if it weren't true. I mean, because like I assumed in my 10-year-old naivete that, well, of course it's true. Some publisher, it's printed. Look at that. It's literally printed on the page. So, I had this sort of aspect to it. So for several summers, again, in my early teens, I would read all these books and I was just fascinated by them. And I really believed them. I was like, oh my God, this world is so crazy and wild. There's all these sorts of things. But I gradually became disillusioned because I realized that there was very little actual investigation. Most of the books I was reading, like, Stranger Than Science by John Edwards or something, they're all these 50s, 60s, 70s, sort of dramatic, sensational pulp books. They all had these breathless, dramatic, sensational stories, but there was very little research, right? It was like, there'd be some story of, two kids that were snatched out of off a London street by some tentacle that snatched them off and pulled them into the sewer. I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. That, like, hold on. What year was that? What were their names? Who saw this? Because they were never heard again. So somebody must have seen this, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I gradually sort of became more skeptical. I'm like, well, hold on here. It's like, there's all these dramatic, sensational stories, but there didn't seem to be anybody that was actually investigating them. And, when I read closer at these books and in the TV shows and things like that, it was clear that it was mostly what I now recognize as folklore. It was stories. It was legends. It was, friend of a friend, right? Who said this, right? It is said that. And I'm like, hold on here. I want to know for myself. I don't want to just take someone else's word for it, some random publisher or some random author who I've never heard of, who I'm being presented as being factual. So that sort of launched it for me, was sort of this turning point in my early teens where I said, these are cool mysteries, right? If Bigfoot's out there, if Chupacabra's out there, that didn't emerge until the 90s. But if these things are real, then this is important, right? If psychics can predict the future like Nostradamus and remote view and see things, this is important. This is interesting. This is cool. I want to be part of that. If Bigfoot's out there and all these sorts of things. But if they're not out there, then the question becomes, why are people thinking they're out there? What are people mistaking for evidence for these things? And it could be hoaxes, it could be misinformation, it could be misunderstandings, whatever else. And so that sort of led me to a degree in psychology and sort of looking at the different ways in which people, can misperceive things and misunderstand things. And of course, there's lots of crossover with mentalism and magic and psychology as well. And then that sort of got me on the path of doing these sorts of investigations.
And that makes sense how you wound up writing a whole book about creepy clowns and getting into creepy clowns, right? Because that is just another one of those phenomena.
Yeah, and I mean, and the clown one was kind of interesting because I had written several books before that, including on lake monsters and mysteries and things like that. And I had actually backburnered it. I was like, there's a book, I recognized that there were lots of people who were interested in clowns. And of course, in pop culture, the evil clown trope was everywhere, right? Pennywise, the Joker, John Wayne Gacy, and just all over the place. The Harlequin figure, Punch and Judy, this and that, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And yet there was very little actual research done, as far as I could tell, on the social and cultural significance of that and the history of it. So that was what surprised me. Is like, I'm sure this has been done. I mean, someone else has done this, right? And I looked into it, and I didn't really see. So I did a little bit of research on it, and then I basically backburnered it. I was busy. I went and got a master's degree. And then when I circled back, I just published a book, and I circled back to my publisher, UNM Press, and he said, "Okay, well, what's your next book?" And it's always like, "What have you done for me lately?" Like, I just gave you a book. All right, that was 20 minutes ago. What have you done for me lately? I'm like, he's like, what do you have? Do you have any other books?
Relentless.
Yeah, like I'm like, well, 10 years ago, I started researching a book on clowns. He's like, clowns? Well, evil clowns. Oh, okay, we can do something with that. So I'm like, all right. So I circled back to it, and honestly, I was sure that in the 10 years when I had set aside this book, someone else had done it. I figured, I'll circle back to it because, of course, when you're writing a book, the first thing you do is look for competing titles, right? You don't want to redo something that someone else has already done. I certainly don't want to. So I want to do something that's new and fresh. And so again, I was certain that somebody else had already done this book, and I didn't need to do it. But the more I looked into it, no. I guess I'll do it. So that launched me into the evil clown research.
So what was the thing that stood out for you the most in that, or what was the most interesting, the most shocking, the most frustrating? When you think about that book, like what is the thing that you had the most passion about bringing forward?
Well, there are a couple. One of them was I hadn't really thought about the nature of the clown as trickster, and of course this gets into folklore and things like that. So, I mean, in retrospect, it's kind of obvious. Yeah, that's what that is, right? But sort of digging deeper into that hadn't really the full dimensions of that really hadn't dawned on me. And also the different varieties of clowns and clowning, and particularly the scary evil ones. I had hoped to interview some professional clowns for the book. As you might imagine, they didn't want to talk to me, and it wasn't because I was being obnoxious or trying to rip off the scab of evil clowns. It was that they understandably they didn't want to give any more oxygen or ink to the scary clowns that in some ways many of them felt were actually harming their profession. And I said, look, I'm not sensationalizing evil clowns. If anything, I'm doing the opposite, right? I mean, my book, it's I told them, here's what I've already done. Here's my background and this and that. So, I was not doing a sensational, lurid John Wayne Gacy clowns are evil thing. I was doing quite the opposite. But they thanks, but no thanks. So that I did that, but it was interesting sort of digging into the different varieties. So, for example, I mentioned the Harlequin, Mr. Punch, and the Punch and Judy shows, and there were the marquee ones like Pennywise, right? Everybody goes to Pennywise, right. Everybody goes to Gacy, this and that. But I wanted to sort of take a broader perspective, and so that's why, for example, I have a section on dip clowns. These are carnival clowns you would see at a midway.
Dip clowns, DIP?
DIP clowns, yeah. Not dip clowns, although some of them are, but these are just simple dip clowns. And at first, I wasn't sure whether they would fit or not. I mean, because they're, I love carnivals, I love midways, I love sideshows. I mean, that's, along with magic and other weird stuff, that's my groove. So I was familiar with them, but it wasn't really until partway through the book when I realized that they fit perfectly into the evil clown motif, because they were often dressed as clowns. And their job is to insult people like that. That's what they do. Hey there, fatty. How's it going? Is that your wife or is that you? Did you bring your bulldozer with you? High and dry, high and dry, high and dry. And so they would, their whole job is to piss you off enough to make you, put down $5 and buy some softballs and try to throw them at a target and to dunk them into the tank. And so once I sort of realized that's right up in there, right? So they're clowns, but it's a performance, but they're also trying to piss you off because that's the job. Because if they don't piss you off, then no one's buying balls to throw at them. And so when I realized that, so I was fortunate enough the next time that the fair came to town, I hung around the dip clown tank. And I interviewed a couple of the dip clowns, and it was fascinating. I was not expecting the book was going to go in that direction, but all of a sudden, I'm here talking with this guy who just spent 12 hours in cold water getting dunked up and down. His throat is raw. He's smoking a cigarette. He smells faintly of bourbon. And he's telling me about the ball-peen hammer that he keeps in the tank to smash anybody that comes after him, because this has happened in Texas. So,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then, so there's the dip clowns. And then I also have a chapter on clown pornography, which is a legitimate angle. Certainly, to be honest, I was expecting the publisher to cut that one out. I slipped it through, so to speak. So there you go.
That's phenomenal.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, you mentioned the fact that a lot of the clowns that you tried to interview as you were calling them up weren't interested in it because they're afraid of it. For some reason, and I don't know if everybody has this experience, but I do as just a cybersecurity guy. I know an inordinate amount of people who were raised by clowns, like literal traveling clowns.
Really?
Like 3 or 4 children of traveling clowns.
Really?
Yeah. Well, one of those is one that we met. Mason, you remember Jenna Rose Nethercott? Her parents were clowns.
Actually,
and
yes.
She was raised in that lifestyle. I've got another person that I know who is that. And then I've come across like 3 or 4 other people in the past couple of decades who, as they were introducing themselves and we were talking about their background, have said, yeah, my parents were clowns. and they didn't mean it as an insult, about their parents. It's just their parents' lifestyle and job.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's wicked cool.
The coolest people, Perry. This is
yeah.
You're just a nexus of cool people.
That's what I think about you. Like you've somehow in your job pulled together all the threads of everything that I've been interested in my life. Mason, anything else on the clown bit that you want to dive into?
I guess I'm curious if in your research for that, when you were looking at the more contemporary stories of bad or creepy clowns, if you had one that is your favorite for some reason, whether it's just a particularly creepy one or if it's just really dumb, but like a story from when they resurged at some point in popular media.
Ooh, that's a good question. It's interesting. I was often asked when clowns went bad. Right, because there was this notion that clowns were good, and then Stephen King, and then the Chiodo brothers with Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and this and that. That at some point there was this cultural event or this Thanos snap finger. I don't know. There was a time when clowns suddenly turned evil, and that was one thing that I at first believed. I assumed that it's like, when did clowns go bad? And then I sort of realized that you're asking the wrong question, because clowns were never good. In America, there was this notion that clowns were good because of the influence of, for example, Bozo the Clown, Ronald McDonald. So a whole generation of Americans grew up with ostensibly happy, good, burger pushing,
like the rodeo clown type thing too. Where they're there for comic relief.
Yeah. So it was against that background that evil clowns sort of came out. And so when Stephen King came up with Pennywise, he wasn't doing this subversive thing like, oh, clowns are good, now they're bad. It's like, if you look at clowns elsewhere, for example, in Europe, clowns were always this ambiguous character. So they, in many places around the world, they never had this assumption that many Americans did that clowns were inherently good. They're like, yeah, they're like fairies, right? Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. You don't mess with them and this and that. So that sort of answers, that sort of touches on your question as to sort of like the bad or the evil clowns, right? And so, when you're looking at it, the number of actual evil or scary clowns, if you're talking about people who are clowns, that is professional actual clowns, the number of evil ones of those is vanishingly small. I mean, I found 3 or 4 examples over the years of somebody who killed people or in one cases molestation, things like that. And of course, the one everybody goes to is John Wayne Gacy, although Gacy's connection to clowning, despite every lurid, film cover and video cover, is tangential at best. He was not a professional clown. He was, in fact, a building contractor by trade. He did kill, they believe, over a dozen young men, but not in clown costume or anything else. It was just he did perform as a clown occasionally, but that wasn't his thing. But of course, not only he, in his later years after he was arrested, he built up his own legend of the killer clown. He reveled in it. So part of the reason that people today associate John Wayne Gacy with the killer clown is they're buying into his bluster and his self-aggrandizement of the killer clown. Whereas, again, reality, it was his connection was tangential at best. I would say probably one of the more interesting sort of evil clowns that I came across was the Northampton clown. And we can talk more about that later, but he basically spawned the scary clown panic of 2016.
In Northampton, Mass, right?
No, Northampton, England.
Northampton, England.
Yes.
More of our interview with Ben Radford after this.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But we also sell merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell and grow at every stage of your business, from the launch your online shop stage all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. They have an all-in-one e-commerce platform and in-person POS system, so wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. With the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms, Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers. Shopify has allowed us to share something tangible with the podcast community we've built here, selling our beanies, sweatshirts, and mugs to fans of our shows without taking up too much time from all the other work we do to bring you even more great content. And it's not just us. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Shopify is also the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/REALM now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/realm.
Have you ever been stuck on a call you really wish you could get off of?
I guess it's official.
Oh,
I guess we're partners.
thank you.
I
Here
don't know.
we go.
I feel like after that incredible dinner that we had with you the other night, and I'm not going to tell you how much it was, but
You try to put 24 oysters in a spreadsheet, your accountant's not so happy. So
can't even write those off when,
Yeah,
when they come from
seafood gets tricky. So
Right.
Conference Call follows a down-on-her-luck tech industry wonderkin by the name of Julie Burke, who has no other choice but to partner with two brothers from the reject piles of Shark Tank as they desperately try to develop their next invention. When recordings of Julie's calls with the Toad Bros end up in the hands of an investigative journalist, she presents her audience with the wild twists of Julie's story, showcasing the best of their worst, most cringeworthy phone calls. Conference Call, a Paradiso Media production presented by Realm, stars Elizabeth Henstridge, Jeff Ward, Gregory Stees, and Emma Roberts, and featuring Karen Gillan, Beck Bennett, Dimi Dijuibe, Clark Gregg, and many more. Be sure to listen and subscribe to Conference Call wherever you get your podcasts, or learn more at realm.fm.
Welcome back.
We did have the recent clown panic, the one that everybody's thinking about with the creepy clown standing around, just making people unsettled. Tell us a little bit about the story of that. And then you do mention this trickster angle. I'm sure from your psychology background, you're thinking just some of the psychology of creepiness and uncanniness. But what made that become the thing that it did as it became this new panic?
Well, yeah, there were a couple things going on. Basically, the topics that I cover in the book, it's one of the last chapters, is what are called phantom clowns. And these are evil clowns that are, and again, this goes right into folklore because it's essentially a folkloric phenomena, but it bleeds over into mass media and things like that. So the phantom clowns actually begin in the 1980s, and there's a whole, we could talk for a couple hours on this. So I'll try and sort of give you the overview. But basically, in the early 80s, there were reports of scary clowns driving around trying to abduct children. So either by themselves or sometimes in white vans, because, of course, vans are a popular folkloric motif. And as you might imagine, this panicked teachers and parents because, oh, my God, right, there's somebody trying to abduct kids. And not only that, but they're also clowns. So there's that added layer of, oh, and by the way, they're clowns, which if you think about it as a practical matter, if you're trying to go unnoticed and you're trying to do something and get away, the last thing you would want to dress up as a clown, right? That clowns stand out unless you're in a circus. even in a circus. So just as a practical matter, if you're trying to get away with some crime, for the most part, and there are exceptions, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but if you're trying to abduct kid, that's not a realistic thing to do. Anyway, there was all this panic, as you might imagine, and parents and everyone's freaking out. So they called the police. The police investigated. No sign of the clowns. Like, just there's nothing there. No witnesses, no anything else like that. And yet the kids kept telling these stories, and they kept saying, a week later, and the stories actually spread from place to place, in typical folkloric fashion. And over the course of several months, and in fact, several years between 81 and like 84, 85, these sporadic reports of these clowns. But again, there was never any evidence of them. None were ever arrested. There was never any evidence. There was for the most part, adults didn't see them. These were stories and rumors that circulated among children and from children to the parents and teachers. So Lauren Coleman, in his book Mysterious America, is credited for being the first to write about these phantom clowns. And there were later reoccurrences. For example, there was some in Honduras and England and elsewhere. So the phantom clown panic sort of, as usual, they emerged, they reached a peak, and they sort of faded away, often around Halloween, which probably won't surprise you. In any event, so that's the history of these clowns. And as a folklorist and someone who's written about these sorts of weird things, I knew that typically around Halloween, there would be these panics, right? These sort of moral panics. There's ones about tainted Halloween candy, which Joel Best has written about, and others as well. The Halloween sadist legends and things like that. And this sort of tied in with that. And it wasn't really until 2013 when that blended with social media. And you had what was called the Northampton Clown. There was a guy in Northampton, England, who dressed as a clown, and it's interesting, he didn't threaten anyone. He was intentionally creepy, though, right? So he would stand sort of waving to people silently as they drove by on the streets, right? Usually at night or in parks. Again, he wasn't threatening anybody. He didn't have any weapons, but there was this sort of, it was just intriguing enough to go viral, which is exactly what he was expecting and exactly what happened. So sure enough, the Northampton Clown had its own hashtag, people reporting seeing the clown, taking photographs of them, sometimes with him, but nobody knew who he was. He would just sort of appear, late at night and do these sorts of things and, hand out balloons now and then and sort of fritter away. It later turned out, because as I'm sure you know, England is full of security cameras. There are more security cameras in England than anywhere else in the world, as far as I know. So it's harder to get away with that sort of thing in the UK. And sure enough, people eventually tracked him down. But it wasn't the police, because keep in mind that dressing as a clown isn't illegal. So even though he was sort of unnerving people and making people wonder what's going on, this and that, he wasn't doing anything illegal. So they call the cops. They're like, what do you want me to do? which law, right? What do you want me to do? So I think he was sort of more seen as a local celebrity. Probably in some cases a local nuisance. Anyway, it turned out that it was in fact a local young filmmaker who was, trying to sort of get some publicity, and they actually spawned copycats. There was another case in the Staten Island Clown. There was a case a year or two later where once again you had an evil clown that was seen in Staten Island. Again, not threatening anybody, but just clowns out of their context are inherently creepy. And I can talk more about that later. So they were expecting it to go viral, and sure enough, it did. And once again, this was also a publicity stunt for a local filmmaker. So for the most part, the scary phantom clowns sort of faded away, like the real life ones. I'm not talking about the Joker and Pennywise. I'm talking about sort of real life viral video, actually somebody in a clown costume, although not necessarily clowns. It's important to make that distinction. Just because you buy a clown mask doesn't make you a clown, which is a point that many clowns pointed out to me. Like, just so we're crystal clear, right? Buying a mask doesn't make you a clown.
That's fair. I can see how they'd want to protect that.
Yeah, like, because I mean, there's a whole honorable tradition and makeup and designs. I mean, there's a whole clown industry and subculture that I respect. I don't. It's not that wasn't the particular angle that I took for my book, but I'm aware of it and I respect it.
I know lots of people who've been to clown camps to be educated on clown skills and all the apprenticeship type stuff.
It's not as easy as you might look.
Yeah, exactly. It is a form of art that takes a lot of discipline to do it well.
Exactly. So against this background, we have the 2016 Phantom Clown Panic. And it was odd because my book had actually been published, I think, in March of that year. And then around Halloween was when this clown panic, just shortly before Halloween is when this clown panic emerged. And I actually had people who were like, so Ben, where were you the other night? Because there was an evil clown who was like, yeah, were you behind that? I'm like, no, this is not a publicity stunt. I could have predicted it just because I've researched it. But I mean, I wasn't behind it. Just for the record, I had nothing to do with it other than trying to explain it to people. But I'll try again. It's a complex topic and there's lots of aspects. So I'll try and summarize it here. But basically, in August 2016 in Greenville, South Carolina, there were reports of children, once again, that were almost being abducted. Not being abducted, but almost being abducted by clowns. And most of the reports were from children, just as we saw in previous years and even back in the 80s in Massachusetts and elsewhere. And when the adults were asking, well, what happened? The kids would say that there were clowns living in the woods behind these apartment buildings. This is more urban than you might expect. And yet behind this one apartment building, there were a copse of woods. And so the story went, if you followed a trail into the woods, and Hansel and Gretel motifs are coming out, you would finally find not a house of candy, but a house of clowns, where allegedly a bunch of clowns lived together in some sort of clown commune, who they were sitting around waiting for children to abduct. Again, this is straight out of Stephen King, right? Stephen King in fairy tales. And once again, as with the previous Phantom Clown panics, there was never any evidence of this. Of just kids are saying this. Every now and then you have an adult who would say, I saw something in the woods, right? Because once you tell people to look for anything weird, whether it's Bigfoot or UFOs for us, they're going to see it because they've been psychologically primed, right? And so when these rumors circulate in this community, and everyone's talking about it, because why wouldn't you, right? Child abductions folded in with scary clowns. So every now and then there would also be a parent who would say, yeah, I saw something, it was in the woods. And at one point they were actually firing weapons. They were firing guns and bullets into the woods. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but this was taken pretty seriously. And so this happened. And again, I'm following this in real time, right? So it was fascinating to me, having written Bad Clowns and having done research on this. So I would wake up in the morning with a Google alert and I'm just like, every morning I'd wake up like, what weird clown shit's going on today? And sure enough, so exactly as happened previous years, the sightings, spread and spread and spread. So it wasn't just in South Carolina; it went to other cities, in Atlanta, Michigan. It just this sort of snowballing effect. And what began to happen was that even though there were never any clowns or anyone else arrested or identified in the original case, other people would see these news stories and they would dress up as clowns and basically do copycat hoaxes.
Ostension.
Yeah, ostension, exactly. So they'd see on the news like, oh, did you hear about these crazy clowns? Yeah, that's crazy. Like, hey, I got a clown mask in my closet. You want to go cruise Walmart and scare some old ladies? Yeah, let's do it.
I was really expecting and fearful that a lot of that would turn into clown just being shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the concerns, right? Because, with ostension, anytime you're acting out a legend, there's the chance that someone's actually going to get hurt. Look, if you're acting out Bloody Mary, go in your bathroom, light a candle, say Bloody Mary 13 times or 100 times, take your pick. The chance of Bloody Mary actually coming and harming you are close to zero. However, if you're dressing as a clown, whether or not you have bad intentions and you're running after kids in a park, that's going to get you killed.
Yeah.
Not the wisest move in the world.
Yeah.
This is not right. Exactly. So, but you had this fascinating blend of, so in the 2016 clown panic, you had some hoaxes, right? You had people who were basically faking clown sightings. So you would have people who would say, yeah, I saw an evil clown. A clown knocked on my window at midnight and ran away. And people would investigate, and that didn't happen. They later admitted it didn't happen. There was one woman I remember I wrote about who was late for her job at McDonald's, ironically. And the reason she was late, she said, was that a clown, as she was getting into her car, a scary clown came at her with a knife. Fortunately, she was able to fight him off, but it made her 20 minutes late for work. She later admitted this. This was, of course, a hoax. So there were hoaxes, people who were faking not only clown sightings, again, just a flat out hoax. They later admitted they made the whole thing up. But then you also had copycats. So you had people where they would hear about these stories, and again, they would perform it. They would like, hey, everyone's making the news. It's a low risk, high yield prank, right? Because if you're successful, you make national news, right? You got John Muir on ABC News talking about you, or CNN, right? There's a clip of you. If you're in trouble, you're arrested. Okay, 17-year-old in the clown mask. What are you going to do with me? All right. So, and then that also morphed into, for example, viral videos. And so there were actually what were called clown lockdowns. So in Alabama, for example, and other places as well, schools were actually locked down. And what would happen is that people dressed as clowns, typically students, which won't come as a surprise to anybody who went to high school. They're like, I don't want to go to math class today. Hey, I have an idea. So they would put on a clown mask or do a little clown thing, and they would put something on TikTok or Instagram or any social media. It's like, hey, I'm going to come shoot up the school. I wouldn't open the school on Monday. And it's interesting, right? Because the police have to take that seriously because, unfortunately, in America, there are school shootings, right? So they're just dovetailing onto this phenomenon. So there was this interesting dynamic where the police couldn't ignore the threat because technically it's a threat against the school. If you are in charge of protecting school security and you ignore a threat against the school and it happens, you lose your job, you are public enemy number one. On the other hand, you could be 99.7% sure this is bullshit. So there was this tension. And so what would happen is that the schools would be concerned about it. Again, probably often recognizing that there wasn't any truth to it, but they got to be better safe than sorry. The police take the same tack. And then what happens is that parents who might otherwise think this is all silly, it's legitimized by the police and by the schools because they're like, I didn't think this was true. This all seems silly to me. But, I got an email from the school saying that they're shutting down the school. Oh my God, there must be something to it. So this sort of self-legitimizing aspect of the whole clown phenomena. Anyway, so that was sort of that launched. That went again from about August or September, and it sort of rose right around Halloween, then sort of peaked by November, and then it sort of faded away. So that was the basics of the 2016 Scary Clown Panic.
And then with the national news coverage that was getting and being beamed into every household, I'm sure there's a piece we can talk to about media literacy and when it's received by people, and how that spreads through that. I'd be interested to get your take on talking about media literacy through the lens of using this as a jumping off point. Yeah.
And I've written a couple books on media literacy, including Media Myth Makers and to some extent my latest book, America the Fearful. But yeah, it's fascinating because, on one hand, you really see, and this also, of course, folds right into folklore, you see the role that social media plays in spreading misinformation. And of course, all information, but particularly misinformation. There's been many studies that have shown that misinformation is greatly amplified on, for example, YouTube algorithms, for example. If you start going down a hole of conspiracy theories, hey, would you also like to see this video, this other crackpot? Sure, you would.
Yeah. Hey, you want to go a little further down? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah. The algorithms don't point you to a skeptical, sober point of view. They point you to even more wilder, crazy, bullshit. And so there's this aspect of media literacy where you try and encourage people to do critical thinking and try to, parse out, okay, what's the message? Who is telling you this? What's their motivation behind it? And what sort of consequences are there, right? So if you believe some false factoid of whatever it is, it may or may not harm you. If, on the other hand, you believe some false factoid about, for example, QAnon or Comet Ping Pong, the guy that, he heard this conspiracy rumor that there were children being trafficked and held in this basement at this pizza joint in Washington, D.C. And based upon this rumor, he went in there with a gun to liberate these children. Turns out that the whole thing was completely false. In fact, the place doesn't even have a basement. Again, but this is all, QAnon politically motivated stuff, but it highlights the very real dangers that can emerge from these sorts of things.
I'm curious. I don't have any hard facts and data on hand, but I'm curious if in your research come across anything to talk to the point of generational differences when it comes to media literacy? It's kind of a meme to say, for people in my age, our parents were like, don't trust anyone on the internet. Everyone on the internet's a stranger. And then 10 years later, they're the ones who are on all these scam groups and like losing all their money and falling down these conspiracy holes. And I don't know if it's like an accessibility and technology level thing because, if you didn't grow up with the internet and you're unfamiliar with it or what, but there definitely seems to be a generational difference in terms of how media literacy is handled. I don't know if you have any insight into that.
Yeah, it is interesting because, on one hand, you would expect the opposite, right? I mean, ostensibly, older people are wiser.
Right.
You've been around for 75, 80 years. You've seen more than I have, and I'm 30, so,
Right.
But what you find is that there's a couple of different dynamics. One of them is as you sort of touched on, familiarity with the medium. And, you have people who, older folks who they're not stupid. They just, they don't know how to access the apps and things like that other people take for granted. And again, it's not because they're stupid. It's just, they didn't grow up with that. I mean, they can learn it, but they're like, why I don't have any use for this, so that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is, of course, that these sorts of things are getting more and more sophisticated. So as you guys know, even in recent months, there's been AI cloned voices, right? So there's a scam about a daughter being abducted. Hey, I'm being held for ransom. Send me some money. And it was not her daughter's voice. It was AI cloned, but it was close enough. If somebody who is calling you and you hear their voice, of course you're going to think it's them. I mean,
yeah.
It's the old story about if you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras. Well, in this case, it's perfectly rational and reasonable to assume that you're talking to a real person. So part of it is that sophistication as well.
Just one little a footnote on that is I'm thinking about this in less of the more sophisticated stuff, which is like terrifying because it could fool anybody. But in terms of like the general presentation of information on the internet, I don't know if it's like a navigation thing or part of sponsored posts and advertising or.
Yeah, that's Perry's purview.
After the break, the conclusion of our interview with Ben Radford. Welcome back.
The thing that I was thinking there, from a psychology angle, there's like a huge framing effect that comes with that, right? Because an older person has been conditioned to understand what legitimate news looks like. There's a chyron on the bottom. There's, a set in the background.
It's Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, I mean, there's the person at the desk, and now there's tons of illegitimate misinformation, disinformation news that comes looking very polished and legit, sometimes even more polished than somebody's local news station. So you've got that framing effect at play. You already mentioned hoofbeats type of thing. If I'm picking up the phone, I don't associate that as a technology interaction.
Right.
I associate that with as an analog interaction.
Right.
And now you put something that's plausibly my niece or granddaughter or even daughter's voice, and you add a little bit of line noise to that, and the believability factor goes up, exponentially. So I think in a lot of ways, it's hard to make these categorical statements about older people are better or worse, or younger people are better or worse. It just depends on where the psychology-based trigger points are going to lie.
That totally makes sense because, I mean, there are loads of people of all ages that are very embedded in different forms of disinformation. I guess what makes me curious is what lowers the believability threshold in people, because there's some stuff that you see and you're like, this is so obviously horse and yet people are buying into it 100%. It's kind of like the creepy clowns thing. And aside, like you mentioned, it gets legitimized by the police response and school responses and things like that. But in the first place, for it not to be dismissed, I think it's interesting what makes that bar move.
It is. Honestly, that's a topic for a whole other show.
Yeah. And there are entire scams built around that type of thing. It's let me put something that has very low plausibility out to millions of people. And the group of people that grabs onto that first, now I can narrow in and exploit them even further. I can take them a lot farther down. There's lots of very sophisticated scams built around that kind of plausibility bar.
How do we combat the erosion of someone's believability threshold for someone who's, starting down a rabbit hole? These algorithms are encouraging it and they're falling further and further into something. How do we fight that? How do we improve media literacy broadly?
Yeah, well, that's, of course, that's a $1 million question. And again, that we could do a whole other show on it. But I mean, Fundamentally, one of the things that I always say, and it's trite, but it's true, is coming back to education. You can't expect people to know things if you don't tell them. And so that's one reason why I've always pressed for critical thinking education to be core topic in schools. Unfortunately, typically what you find is that schools, they sort of hope that critical thinking will happen by osmosis, right? If we teach history, if we teach math, if we teach biology, somewhere in that, they will glean that they need to look at the world through critical thinking. But of course, that's not true at all. So, critical thinking is the prism through which you understand biology, history and things like that. And so because it's a way of thinking and not a discrete topic, it often gets overlooked by school administrators who are like, well, we're teaching the basics. We got these, all the check marks are here. Okay, but you're not teaching them how to think. And that I think is the main failing, but there are many.
Yeah, I mean that's tricky because you're trying to teach a metacognitive process, right? Like it's a very introspective understanding of your own thought processes.
And I think in today's world, it would cause a huge, just to say that you're going to put that in the schools, everybody would assume that it is a very political type of thing that's going on. We're going to teach media literacy, and now now you have people within certain political groups railing against it and forming pacts around trying to fund the dissolution of those things. Is there something that you're truly geeking out about right now that you want to spend a couple of minutes on that's fun to talk about?
The thing that jumps to my mind, and it's something that my mind was spinning off on, and it's small, but it's recent, which is that there's of course been the widely touted UFO reports coming out of Congress, and I've seen lots of people on social media and even friends of mine who are like, oh, the government finally admits that UFOs are real. Well, if you watch the testimony, that's not what's going on. What's happening is one guy said that anonymous guys told him that UFOs are real. So let's be crystal clear about this. But the part that I really find most interesting is that despite, again, the sort of, bloviating headlines about how the government finally admits that UFO is real, is that it's been a core tenet of UFO research and UFO experts, so-called, for decades, that if the public were ever to know the UFOs are real, that is, that's the whole basis of the conspiracy, right? If you ask conspiracy theorists, all right, dude, you're sure that, there's aliens at Area 51 and Roswell and that. Why are they covering it up? What's the end game here? Why is it so important? Why do you think it's so important that top governments across countries and for decades have all colluded to make sure that people don't know about aliens? One of the common answers is, well, if the public knew that aliens were real, the world would end. The people would have this meltdown. They couldn't handle it. This would blow their minds. They would curl up and sob or something, which I've always thought is complete bullshit. It doesn't make sense from any angle. But here's the thing. If what they're saying is true, and it's not, but if what they were saying was true, this is a great test, right? Because there are many, many people online that are saying, this is it. Finally, the government has broken their silence. They've now admitted that aliens are real. If you accept that premise, then if what they've been saying for decades is true, people should be losing their minds, quitting their jobs, going to therapy, and it's not happening.
You might think this is interesting. I, by pure happenstance, spoke with someone recently. I was visiting a friend who works in aerospace as a government contractor, was called to a military base for a different thing, but it was the place where that guy worked before all of this happened. And they were telling me a few things. One is that you can classify anything when you have clearance. You can just classify a document. And something that was pretty common practice, it might be elsewhere, but they were saying here especially was common practice, is to classify things that are not true and hand them out to people as they get hired as sort of a light, like hazing thing of like, oh yeah, here's this classified report. And like they were telling me that one of the guys was really into D&D and so would write these really like elaborate backstories, like he was DMing a campaign. And, like the people would read it and be like, oh, but it was all just kind of an inside joke. And so all of the people in this base of them are now theorizing like, okay, is he doing this for the exposure? Did he actually believe these? Because he worked there for a while. So it seems unrealistic that he would actually have believed them and not known it was a joke like everyone else. But I just thought that was interesting because I had a chance to sort of stick my nose in that world via my friend who couldn't tell me everything because of security clearance.
Sure.
did tell me that much.
Fair enough.
So, Ben, kind of as a last question or a line of thought, you, as I look at your work and have heard you speak on different shows, read a little bit of your stuff, or hopefully more than just a little bit of your stuff, it seems like when you really evangelize for a skeptical approach to things, you're not doing this maybe the way that some people might personify or try to make the skeptic's view very cartoonish or polarizing. It seems like you go in with a lot of respect for people who have certain different beliefs or who are reporting things, and you are very, very curious about the way that you do it. Can you talk about that? Because you do seem to be a very, like the friendly skeptic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, skepticism is a big tent. And there are lots of people who call themselves skeptics. Oftentimes, they're not skeptics at all. For example, the ghost hunters guys.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times I've seen them either in an interview or writing like, well, we're skeptics. Are you? But so, people love to, it's the sort of same thing with, the imprimatur of science. Even if they don't genuinely respect science, they know that other people do. So this is why pseudoscientists and ghost hunters, and they all like to sort of, we're scientific, even though, of course, that they're not at all. And so, it's interesting, coming from that tradition of skepticism and skeptical inquiry and for education, right? So you have people like the amazing Randy, the late Randy, who was a colleague of mine. And of course, he was around forever. Randy tried to sort of, walk that line. He would debunk people, but, he didn't really embrace the debunker label, and nor do I, because my goal is to investigate. As a result of that, I'll often debunk claims, but that's not I'm not trying to go into it trying to say, this is clearly bullshit, let me prove why. And I think part of that goes back to my background in psychology, because I am so cognizant of the ways in which people can misunderstand things, misperceive things, fool each other, and just sort of, most people that come to me with their experiences, they saw a ghost, they saw something weird, they had some deeply profound experience that they believe was supernatural or else. Most of them are sincere. They're not lying, they're not crazy, they're not stupid. They genuinely believe that, and I can tell that. And so if I'm going to come to them and sort of dismiss it like, this is crazy, everybody knows these things aren't real, then that's not going to help them at all. In one of my books, Big If True, I begin with a section on a woman that contacted me because she believed that she was cursed. And this happened several years ago. And I won't go into the whole story, but basically she said, it was this very heart-wrenching email. And I'm certain it wasn't a hoax. I mean, it was clear that it was absolutely true, or she believed it was true. And so I was struggling with that, right? Because I don't want to reinforce her idea that she actually is the victim of a curse, because it's almost certainly not true. And certainly based on my research in psychology and this and that. At the same time, if I had just emailed her back and said, curses aren't real, get over it, get a life, that's number one, not going to help her out. It's not going to help me out. It's not going to make skeptics look any good. And it's just counterproductive. And so to the extent that I can, when I'm doing these investigations, whether it's crop circles or ghosts or psychics or psychomedium, take your pick, I try and approach it from a genuine investigative point of view, where, I'll go into a location and I'll say, look, help me understand what's going on. I'm not here to show you that you're wrong. I'm not here to say you're stupid. I'm here to help us understand what you experienced. And if I can offer them a plausible alternative explanation for what they experienced in terms of a haunting or whatever else, that helps them out, and they can see that I'm making a sincere effort. So I do try and do that. I am sort of known as one of the more diplomatic skeptics, which I take pride in, because I think that's how you help people.
Yeah, and I think even in your books, like when you're talking about doing scientific research in the paranormal, you're actually trying to give legitimate, good, actionable advice to that community about here's how you could up-level your game to potentially gain more credibility, to not just give in to pseudoscience or whatever the fad of the day is for trying to find these things, but here's how to apply a scientific process to the thing that you're trying to legitimately look for.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that's always been my approach is, in what I do, I've spoken to ghost hunting groups, I've spoken to Bigfoot groups. I say, look, I'm not the enemy here. It's like, I may be more skeptical than you are, but we're all trying to solve the mystery. I genuinely am, right? If there's a ghost somewhere, I want to find that out. If Bigfoot's out there, Chupacabras out there, believe me, I want to be the front of the line to find this out. And so, that's one of the themes, and I'm glad, Perry, that you recognize that, is when I criticize these groups and these people that aren't doing good research, it's not because I think the topic is too stupid to look at. It's not because I think this is too silly. It's because exactly the opposite, because I do take it seriously, because I'm saying, yes, this topic is worth investigating. It's worth doing good research on. And because of that, do better research. So that's the theme of, I did this book, Investigating Ghosts. And part of it is for ghost hunters to up their game. Say, look, man, if you think ghosts are real, more power to you. Do better research, do better quality research. And if what you're saying is true, then you'll prove it. But the quality of the research that you're doing and the methodologies and research design, it's just so poor that, of course, you're not getting good evidence.
Thanks so much for listening, and thank you to Ben Radford for spending time with us. Check out our show notes for links to find out more about Ben, as well as his books, his podcast, Squaring the Strange, and more. If you have any questions, feedback, ideas for a future episode, or ideas for a future episode, you can reach us at hello@eighthlayermedia.com. Or if you'd like information about sponsoring an episode, a few episodes, or even an entire season, hit us up. We'd love to hear from you. Digital Folklore is created and produced by Eighth Layer Media. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.
Hey, it's Mae Whitman, and I play Frankie in the new Realm podcast, The Sisters. The Sisters is about a museum curator of medical oddities who investigates the origins of a mutated skeleton with 2 layers of bones.
7 ribs are completely fused. And you have no idea where this came from?
No, she was sent here anonymously.
Not she. They, maybe?
Wait.
I've never seen anything like this.
Soon, she uncovers an extraordinary mystery that connects her present with one family's tragic past in hauntingly dangerous ways.
My grandfather was a journalist back in the 60s and 70s. He specialised in strange stories.
Who are they? How are they connected to the skeleton?
Play the tape. You'll see.
Listen to The Sisters wherever you get your podcasts.
We dream about it. We both dream about it.
How often?